Well, here I am at the Wise Guys PC Testing Center in lovely Ceres, California. So I actually took the punch list from my study guide review and maybe spent an hour a day for the past 3 days. And then about 30 minutes this morning going over some of the gaps. So I'm feeling pretty well prepared. Always just a little nervous when you go into one of these things, but I think I got a lot of stuff covered. I guess the biggest concern would be that that's not very similar to the Service Cloud exam that I took, and so my expectations might be a little off there, but we'll see. Let's see. So, a few things I want to note down after I get done with the exam, I think, are, just how many were just nuts and bolts questions, configuration questions. How many were more business analyst type questions, given a scenario, how would you do this? Definitely interested in seeing how they ask those types of questions. And then probably try to recall just how many questions were really hard or I was very unsure about. So I think in those three categories, I'll try to write down some notes right after I get out. I'll also try to come up with my impressions about just how well I think it's measuring the real world and how things are actually when you actually do consulting projects, if these questions are relevant to those types of endeavors. Well, okay, here I go. Okay, wow. So, I used every minute of 105 minutes I had. So, pretty, I don't know, not tough, but long. There maybe have been like one really tough question. Most of the questions are just kind of middle of the road, steady questions. You didn't have to think a lot on each one. There were about 3 or 4 that were what I would categorize as nuts and bolts, or just, very, very easy to connect the dots. The middle of the road ones, you had to think about it a lot, each one. Things like, is that really a feature? So you can eliminate the answer. And then how would you use a feature to meet the goal? So, so, I don't know, I'm pretty tired after that one. So another comment is, whether the questions were similar to what you encounter in real consulting engagements. I'd say I did a pretty good job there. There were actually 2 or 3 questions that were almost word for word something that a customer's asked me. So I'd say it measures okay there. Wasn't really thinking about other situations while I was going through the exam. So, but when it did seem like it was exactly what other people had asked, then that certainly popped in my mind. Let's see, something else. Comparing to the Service Cloud exam, the Service Cloud exam, I think it had harder questions, or more, a number of harder questions. But then there were easier questions, and I got through the time allotted pretty quickly there. At least pretty quickly relative to the Sales Cloud exam. So yeah, this one, like I said before, I used every minute. I was down to like 3 minutes by the time I got to the last question. And then I did a quick review of a couple others and then hit submit. So, um, one thing that made the questions a little difficult and maybe accounts for how much time I took was um, reading the questions. Sometimes it was like, what the hell are they talking about? So, most of the questions were, one sentence, two sentences, a couple of three-sentence ones, but sometimes it was like, okay, what are they leading to? And but then after reading the sample answers, right, then it wasn't such a big deal. It made it a lot clearer what the question was about. So um, I didn't have that feeling in the other exams that I took. So the other feeling I had was, even though I was down to the wire, when I hit the submit button, I felt really good, and I had almost no doubt that I passed, which is different from Service Cloud. Service Cloud, I think I was kind of wondering if I passed or not. So the other thought that came to mind was during my study guide review, I mentioned a bunch of times that, boy, you can't really study for this stuff. And I think that's definitely true. The deductive logic or inductive logic, that part is a practice skill for sure. I'm sure you could come up with a methodology for beginners, but to be able to do it quickly enough to get through the exam, it definitely takes practice. I will say that just knowing the nuts and bolts can eliminate a vast number of false answers just because you know that, oh, that's not a feature in Salesforce, so that can't be the answer. There were a few questions where I thought, well, maybe not a few, maybe two, where, oh, they all seem to be reasonable answers. You had to pick the best two rather than the absolutely right two. You're picking the best two out of several possible answers. So, in that case, you are kind of running on your experience and your instinct, and maybe what Salesforce wants you to answer. So, I'd say that you have those two elements there. One is know your stuff, know your nuts and bolts. That'll help you a lot. And then the second part is you need to get as much experience as you can in implementing these features so that you can get through the logic of the questions in the allotted time. Something else I noticed on a couple of 3 questions was seem to have contradictory statements, like the support team can see records by the sales rep, but then right after that it will say, but the support team cannot see any records by the sales reps. So I was wondering if there was a word missing in there, like maybe the support team should not be able to see records by other sales reps or something like that. Now, it's certainly common for customers in real life to give you contradictory information, right? So I don't know if that was on purpose or that was just, poor wordsmith by the question writer. The difference between exam and real life is in real life you can go back to the customer and ask them to resolve the conflict. Anyway, that was another thought that came to mind. Let me summarize by comparing the new exams to the old certified consultant exam. The new Sales Cloud and Service Cloud exams are definitely more sophisticated I think that's the right word. I know there are questions about passing these exams, without having taken classes or having lots of experience. I would like to say that I still would have passed in that situation. I kind of 50-50 on that, I think. But that's just myself. Everybody learns differently. They pick things up at different rates. Everyone has a different learning curve. I will say that Salesforce just has lots of stuff that it does. A lot of stuff under the covers, like security and sharing rules. You know, workflow, how opportunities work with products and campaign influence and things like that. It'd be, cramming all that stuff into short-term memory and then taking the exam and trying to connect the dots at the same time, I think would be challenging, to say the least. Definitely easier to have the nuts and bolts information in your long-term memory so that then you can spend more time, I guess, looking at the question, understanding the logic of the question, and then applying your knowledge. Trying to extract the short-term memory stuff at the same time, I think, would really be tough. For people who don't have the experience, my advice would be to find a way to get that experience. Volunteer for a nonprofit. Come up with scenarios and work them through to the fullest. Make sure your scenario includes a closed or private security model. That will surface a lot of stuff that you need to know. So that's kind of my advice there. So everybody, good luck on their attempts at the exam, and I will certainly blog more as things come up or people ask me questions. Okay, so I'll talk to you next time.